Hello, everyone, and welcome on the public space. Today we have an exciting episode, and it's a lucky thing because if it had been one of these documentary episodes with Frame Game, I think I could not have held to the end. I am totally exhausted. I've done a complete move of all my stuff in this new apartment where I've installed the studio. As you can see, there's a kind of rock wall behind me that is a new thing that I've put together, and I've moved all of my things to come live here. So it's
Ah,
a new home in northern Quebec, even more north than I used to be. I'm moving north every year, and hopefully I can survive a nuclear holocaust. Frame Game, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Look at that background. It's talk about aesthetics. It matches the blazer. It complements the map. I'm digging it.
Yeah, I worked hard to really choose a nice background. I didn't want to look like Bunty King with a green drape behind me, and I didn't want to look like Ben Shapiro with HD TVs behind me.
Well, to be fair, no one wants to look like Ben Shapiro. So
So today we are talking about the future, about what the right can do in terms of strategies. I can't wait to hear what you have to say because I think that's one point where we disagree. We may look at stuff in different lens. And we've had disagreements in the past episodes. Now, just to recapitulate, you've been presenting very strong data showing that white populations are becoming minorities in their own countries, that there is a strong system of there is a strong Jewish presence in the mainstream media and politics that ensures partly and ensures many things, but in part ensures that the discourse on racism and the leftist position on racism is maintained. And we have also talked about the media and how the environment of information that people live in is controlled by elites who control the media outlets, what they do, and how they do things, and how they cover specifically things that relates to the right.
that's exactly right. And one unifying theme behind those previous episodes we've done together has been identity politics. And, with respect to each of these different vectors, whether you're talking about, white people, whether you're talking about Jewish identity politics, whether you're talking about the media, we have seen in each of these previous episodes the power of the diversity industry and just how the identity politics ecosystem we live in has been codified into law and then expanded through culture and commercialized through business.
All right. Now, I need to tell you, this makes me think of what brought me to YouTube. Because before I was even known as a right winger commentator, before I'd even talked about race on YouTube, before I was aware that there was such a thing called the Jewish question, I was joining YouTube and I thought, what will be your team, JF? And my team was I'm going to make videos that defend the white heterosexual male in the same way that the main character in Thank You for Smoking has decided to defend the cigarette companies.
That is hilarious. What a perfect analogy for like the modern landscape of what you're up against. I love it.
And I'm pretty sure that Thank You for Smoking, the movie, has influenced me more than anything else in that quest. I wanted to be the asshole who will take the side of the oppressed white heterosexual male. That was my team. I didn't know where it would lead me. And here we are. We discovered so many things on the public space. I'm just stunned that it's still my goal today. It's still what I do. But I'm shocked at the barrage that I encountered.
Okay, for historical purposes, can I ask which came first, the ideology or the brazen shitpost? Like, was it the identification as the heel, or was it or was it a little bit of the ideology and then magnified? But like, what was the genesis? What was the first seed?
The genesis was that I was seeing anti-SJW discourse on YouTube, but it was ridiculing the position of someone saying I'm a black female, or I believe in intersectionality and we need to care about all this. And I said, no, that's not the right way. Don't destroy what they did. Use it.
Yeah.
That was really. I wanted to have an evolution on the anti-SJW discourse that would show them their own contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go look at my very early YouTube videos, before anything alt-right came into my life, you will see I did a series called The Contradictions of Feminism. And you can see this is my approach. This is how I approach YouTube intellectually. We're going to look at the thought of the left, and we're going to demonstrate the contradictions. And the outcome of this will be that white heterosexual male are also a minority worth protecting. If you want to see the world this way.
Jeff, did you just see the super chat you just got?
No.
By Padre Speaks?
Padre Speaks says, thank you for being white staring, JF Garyepi. What is white staring?
No, being what instead
white
thank you
starring.
for not smoking. Yeah. Thank you for not smoking. It's thank you for being white.
Thank you for being white. Oh my God, this will be a good parody trailer.
That is fantastic, actually. But actually, what you're talking about kind of makes me think, before we get into the material, just one more bit of navel gazing, I guess, is it reminds me, before you and Worski came along, you're right that most of anti-SJW YouTube was always sort of going against the identitarianism of like the POC coalition. But one of the sort of unique things, I guess, about the brand that you guys created was sort of like the hero's journey, like actually identifying with a straight white heterosexual like male. It like there is that element of like by actually making you're not just attacking a negative identity, like you're positively affirming like the beauty and history of a real identity that that is a step beyond. And I think that's one of the steps into boldness that changed the YouTube game, so to speak.
Absolutely. Fascinating to think about this, because I think about the series of events that then led me to Warski Live, and it was Coach Red Pill. It was fucking Coach Red Pill.
Huh.
We were on the stream together, and Andy Warski showed up on the stream. And then this whole stream went on Warski Live after. And that's where Coach Red Pill told Andy, you won't do business just bashing SJWs. It's over. You're on a sinking ship. And Andy was totally against what Coach Red Pill was saying. However, 1 week later, he changed his mind. He hires me. And I said to Warski, are you telling me that you now believe what Coach Red Pill told you, that you needed to develop something positive instead of something negative? And he's like, yeah, I think he was right.
Ah. All right. That's I didn't know any of that. Interesting, the role everyone has to play on this, which kind of dovetails into what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is the future, tactics, strategies, and the roles that people can play. In particular, if I can sort of jump right into it, you mind if I kind of do my opening spiel here?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So the purpose of tonight's special report is to present a strategy guide for attaining power. So this is not a comprehensive one. We're not going to have time to get into the super nitty gritty, but it's a broad overview of a theory of attaining power that I want to present, and you can take it or leave it. You can take portions of it. It is just a broad swath of ideas. I'm going to start out with the general theory behind it, and then we're going to get pretty specific. So that we're not just talking, like these are all like actionable things. So my first preliminary note is that JF, that I have a different victory condition than many in the chat or you. As I've noted many times before, I am not a white nationalist. My victory condition is that white identity politics has achieved parity with cultural and legal parity with POC identity politics. And for me, those victory conditions really mean three things. White positivity is taught in schools and cinema instead of white toxicity. Marxist phrases like white privilege and white supremacy are as costly to people socially, financially, commercially, legally as the N word or the K word, and all legal doctrines applying racial preferences in any way whatsoever, or in any way limiting the freedom of association of American citizens to transact business or deal with private property are abolished in total. So that gets us, we may part ways after that point, right? This is a point I've expressed a number of times, but I think it bears repeating at the beginning of this. But I believe the following strategy guide is suitable for everyone in the nationalist coalition to unite behind until that glorious balance to the force is restored. And if at that point we become, the trains, sort of train rails get detached and it becomes one of these like alt-right, alt-light things that happened in early 2017, so be it. But I think everyone would be better off from that starting point than living in a world where I feel like there's nowhere to, like, for me, like this is not the world I want to raise my grandkids in the way it's going. And given what we've already covered to date, we are headed for a nightmare. I think there is a extreme sense of urgency in me to get to start this thing a rolling to the extent that I can do whatever I can, even though some people in the chat may disagree with my goals. But I think these are all pretty benign.
I think those are great goals. These are also my goals. However, they are embedded in a system of goals that is much more complex and much more large. Of course, I dream of liberty. I dream of self-sustainability. But I fully agree with these goals. And the fascinating thing about these goals is that they are achievable in a lifetime and even in less than a decade, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, the less than a decade thing, is going to depend on what waves there are to crest, and that's another thing that we'll cover is sort of the subject of momentum, and how part of success is just being in position. For my grandfather has a saying, "I'd rather be lucky than good." And it was always kind of this, like, he'd always say it with this shit-eating grin, but the main purpose of it was to say that, being good is great sort of morally, but there's nothing quite beats a lucky break. And the best thing of all is to be as good as you can, so that when a lucky break comes along, you really, really shine. And I would say that is the reason that the contemporary modern nationalist right wing came about. It was because many disparate groups happened to be in position with the rise of Trump on the internet. And because they were all in ready position for when Trump came around, they were able to create a tidal wave of cultural influence. And that's everything from Gamergate to the Manosphere to, sort of the Alex Jones type like brand to, sort of the farther right elements of Fox News. You had the timing of Breitbart coming around exactly when he did. So we have a number of waves coming up, right? So we've got obviously the 2020 election. And that could be an election that is totally rife with identity politics, right? Some of the people who have flirted with throwing their hat in the ring from the DNC include Eric Holder, Kamala Harris, Howard Schultz from Starbucks. I mean, you have a lot of people who are just who make their bones calling white people racist and stirring up a lot of animus that way. And the people who are disenfranchised by that brand of politics are going to be looking for somewhere to turn. So to the extent that there's infrastructure in place, they will turn to, the philosophies that we on this show talk about.
That would be probably the best outcome for the best possible branch for the alt-right right now would be to have an extremization of the left.
Right. Within reason, right? There are certain forms of extremization that are, like, for example, the development of AI hate speech algorithms is sort of a running theme on my channel and you've picked up on this yourself. I think someone super chatted you in a recent episode and sort of made the claim that, that ultimately the left going too far is very good for us. And you pointed out that sometimes it can actually just cause a suicide. That the gaslighting can be so strong that instead of causing a reaction, it can cause people to give up. So that is definitely something to be out on the lookout for, and it's one of the reasons that we're doing the pioneering stuff here, trying to put out content all the time on this, because it's important to never give up, to always keep moving forward, and never let the bastards grind you down.
Yeah, and what I meant was the extremization of the DNC, essentially the DNC losing its ground in the center and going further left. If the DNC was to begin acting like a blue-haired feminist, that would be a good opportunity to advance the kind of strategy you put here.
Right. But we do, is it provided there's infrastructure in place that can take advantage of it. Because one of the ways, we'll go over that the Overton window shifts is when there is when the challenge dies down. That is one of the reasons that it's so effective to make such crazy statements the way the far SJW left does, is because you end up settling somewhere in the middle if you don't completely destroy them. You they end up anchoring you to an extreme, and it shifts the whole conversation. So it's very important that we stamp out people who are trying to abuse Overton window tactics. But this does get us to the starting point of the strategy guide is a sober reflection on where exactly we are, because a lot of people are going to take issue with the sort of start small nature of what I propose. And I want to the extent that you disagree with what we're going to go over in this stream, you'll have to disagree with my starting assumption here, which is that we won 2016 and we lost 2017, and we are now in a reconsolidation phase where the momentum of 2017 in terms of institutional political power is now completely gone. So if you saw JF's in my last stream where we covered the Media Matters strategy memo for how to deplatform the alt-right and budding nationalist ideologies, I would love to hear someone in the chat tell us that was not convincing, that they executed on that strategy fairly flawlessly. We are living in the aftermath of that memo. And what I am proposing is the reconsolidation of that.
Now, by which measure did we lose in 2017?
Everyone who was institutionally connected to the wing of alt-right politics that we, that was sort of the early sort of branding for this, has been kicked out of office, except Donald Trump, right? Like right now, I mean, no one even really thought about Jared Kushner a year and a half ago. Everyone thought Ivanka was going to be a sideshow. It was Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was feared more than Trump was. You had guys like, Scaramucci and a few others who were, you had Sebastian Gorka. You had these guys who, even though they may have been maybe more friendly, more more sort of beholden to certain Israel first causes than a lot of people in the chat may like. They were certainly very, they were hard-nosed and connected, at least, at most by 2 degrees of separation from the sort of far right think. And now they've all had to disavow formally and in terms of their associations. A lot of what I think people had hoped for positions to be filled in cabinet positions, executive positions, for cultural change to happen, at the local level in terms of your school boards and your city council, and it igniting something that would affect the cultural and political scene, that has not manifested itself. There are a lot of wins. I'm not trying to, this is not intended to blackmail. This is intended to be kind of let's sober up for a second, because the rest of this is going to be very white pilling. And I just one of the things that I want to present is an alternative to the Charlottesville style rallies and shitposting strategy of 2017, which was, about sort of an online presence and then an occasional rally where you would sort of protest something. And that's, I'm not trying to counter signal that. I'm trying to present something that might complement that, or because I don't think we have the institutional power to execute that, to achieve the goals that those rallies are intended to achieve. So I can present a little theory on power here if you want, but I'll
certainly. But I'll share some of my views on what you said. Now, today I was actually rebuilding stuff in my apartment, and I went to the hardware store, and I saw tiki torches there, and I thought, you know what? We need to improve the tiki torches march. And in my mind, the idea came: tiki torches plus bitches. That would work.
You know what? You cannot overstate the power of attractive women in those sorts of things. But there's lots of other, yeah. No, listen, I mean, yes.
Now, more seriously, going back to what you said, I guess I didn't take all of these as defeats. Because I knew that would happen. I knew that Trump was not a candidate of the alt-right, and I knew that Trump would get swallowed by the deep state machine. And so I saw none of this as being surprised. I guess that's why I don't see it as a defeat, but I acknowledge the diagnosis that you do. However, there are records of me in 2016 saying this is what will happen.
Right. Well, I think that you are, you're certainly an exception to the general rule here, because the main weapon has been the deplatforming our ideology and belief system from social media, and certainly from putting up as many obstacles as possible to scaling. All the work it takes to build an audience and to, you rest on this infrastructure of the internet underneath your feet. And you have people like, the Britain First, right? Like the Jada Franson and Paul Golding, they had 2 million likes, right? They had more than the British Labour Party, but they were taken down, right? You see this all the time with these groups with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. And that's the kind of thing that takes a decade to build up. And that has happened left and right. You are one of the very rare examples of people who have successfully built and maintained a brand. But there is this unpredictability to it, and it has prevented the scaling of infrastructure that was planted in 2016, in my opinion. And so, as a result, it has crippled a lot of the reach. In my opinion, I would love to see data in terms of what, but we just don't have it available to see in terms of how many have joined and left in the past year. But I do think that hurt.
It's true. I mean, I might have an isolated bubble view of that, because I've kept growing since 2016 up to the point where now I'm a full-time YouTuber and doing an amazing salary thanks to the people's super chat. And yeah, I didn't feel that, but you're right. I saw it. It's just that I guess when I look back, everything I know how to phrase things so that they are not being censored. I'm very rarely having a strike, and when I have a strike, it's because of a guest. So it shows that there is know-how there on how to phrase things that can be adjusted to Canadian law, to YouTube censorship, to all forms of censorship.
Yeah, that may be, and we can talk about that some more. This is just my assessment of things, because I think that you are, a bit of a unicorn in that way. I think that I can't name anyone else who takes the positions you do who has been able to survive the way that you have in this landscape and thrive in it. So, so anyway, so my general theory of power here is that there's only two variables that matter for power. There's value and there's leverage. Value is the reward you have the ability to give people, And leverage is the cost you have the ability to impose on people. So basically, value gets people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. Leverage gets people to do what you want them to do because it costs them too much not to do it. So whether or not they want to or not, leverage, and that's one of the reasons that there's that quote that it's better to be feared than respected. It's because leverage is sort of a no matter what, but it breeds resentment. Value is a bit weaker, but it's a bit healthier. Would you agree with my assessment as of today's date that the nationalist right does not have any institutional leverage, at least in America or Canada?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there was the expectation that with the rise of Trump, that there would be the occupation within a sufficiently critical number of seats of institutional power that you would begin to see leverage accrue to nationalist philosophies where the same kind of rights that SJW ideologies have to just to really inflict harm on people, like that would be equalized in some way. And given the current state of things, and until a sufficient amount of value, I think, is accrued within the movement, I think that trying to pretend you have leverage right now is probably a losing strategy for power. An example of that might be, and again, I don't mean to countersignal Charlottesville. I think that it did achieve a number of good things. But following on my line here, saying you will not replace us when you don't have any leverage to stop people from replacing you can make you appear weak without, like, it's not giving value to people. That is, it's not rewarding. It's trying to sort of gain power through the leverage track, right? And so this kind of gets to the carrot and the stick sort of long-term strategy. And I'm just going to get into that real quick, and then we'll get specific.
Yeah, I might actually challenge this. I mean, the way I see it, this statement, "you will not replace us," is not so much a statement like "we will stop you from replacing us." It's more, it can be interpreted as a statement of the kind, we are part of the diversity and we are extremely motivated in maintaining our own existence. It might come from an activist part of the movement, that's fine, and I expect them to be more emotionally devoted to their message. And so personally, I'm not seeing it as as representing your hand as being stronger than it really is.
Yeah, well, what I would say, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. What I'm trying to add into the mix is the element of dynamism. That is, that statement by itself is sort of the might makes right, the sort of stick sort of aspect of power. But that is amplified much more if you simultaneously have a parallel track in terms of your messaging, which is the creation of a moral imperative for justice for an oppressed group. That is, there's sort of a carrot and a stick aspect of it. And I've made this analogy before about the hard right and the heart right, and that having just one or the other, if you're just the hard right, it can make you appear kind of static, stilted, like a really small tent. And if you don't have the leverage to pull it off, you don't accrue allies. And so you don't really have people that you can band together with to create a successful coalition to win power. And if you just have the sort of heart right sort of justice for like the sort of carrot rewarding type thing, then you're just weak and you have no leverage. There's no backbone behind it. There's no spine. And so what I am proposing in terms of one of the general themes running through the strategies I'm going to cover is appealing to maintaining the first one, that is maintaining the kind of might is right, manifest destiny, sort of eyes on the prize in terms of being able to accrue power and leverage, power through leverage, but also supplementing it with strategies designed for sort of the heart right, like a little bit more of a moral imperative to normies who might not. There's lovers and fighters, right? Like sometimes a fighter isn't going to fight until he feels the love first, and I think there are a lot of people who might attend rallies if they had first attended festivals or other things that were more based on a celebration of common roots, of arts, of community, something that's more festival instead of rally. And then once they're sort of in the funnel, so to speak, they may be better on both fronts. So that's sort of what I'm getting at here. Another analogy is kind of good cop, bad cop. In this.
To be clear, are you trying to win democratic power? And what would it look like to you? Because there are various strategies that are relevant and others not. If we're talking, are you talking about having a strong alt-right component in the Republican Party? Are you talking about electing individual candidates?
Yes, that's part of it. But the main focus is neighborhoods. So one of the running themes here is to be translocal. So maybe I'll just go through a few of the direct tactics and strategies, and then I'll sort of return to general theory, after we've gone through a few of these.
All right.
So one of them, is sort of like the Tyler Durden strategy, right? So, there's in Fight Club, the way that Tyler Durden set up the Fight Clubs was through weekend trips every weekend to a new city, to a new zip code, getting a couple guys together and setting up a little cell, and then getting on a plane and flying to the next place. And this is I call this sort of like the Tyler Durden strategy, because there's a lot of let me just go through some basic structures about what this would look like. Okay, so you have all of these, by the way, rely on an element of leadership stepping up in a way that is more centralized than there was a big debate about a year ago about centralization versus decentralization. And at the end of the day, there's no such thing as fully decentralized, right? There's always going to be people who emerge and people underneath, and there's always going to be bottom up, autonomy and things like that. But what you're really sort of creating are independent organizations that are affiliates, that is, they operate by themselves, but they are part of a broader national network that they can rely on, that they interface with, that they report to. Usually, I propose on sort of a quarterly basis. And another way to sort of think about this is the people who are leaders are professionals. And this is something that is a bit of a divergence from the kind of just sort of talking online thing. But there are a lot of people who are involved in the movement who do this full time, who this is their life's passion. They are professional about what they do. And so this would be basically one degree above that, where they're also sort of treating the ideology as a product that they are professionally accountable to, to selling in a way. I mean, without putting it so crudely. But essentially how this would look like is this. You draw a heat map of favorable zip codes based on polls and forum data. And there's an easy way to compile this, whether or not you can do this, based on forums. You can do this based on looking at the geographic data from who visits your website. You can run Twitter polls. It's you can just, people kind of also have a general flavor for this. But you pick what the most favorable zip codes are, and then you assign a leader to each zip code, essentially. And it's an honor to be a leader in that way. And I also think that to the extent that there's capital to support it, that they should be paid at least something nominal, so that leaders begin to see this as a profession. And the reason I keep stressing profession is because right now there's more professionals covering the alt-right just in media than there are professionals who are actually propagating like nationalist philosophies. Like if you combine the beat reporters from BuzzFeed and Vox and HuffPo and NY, like that's more than people making a living off of like content production or leading like in nationalist philosophies, period. And you need full-time professionals, and part of that is you're making your money doing it, and you're being compensated accordingly, but you treat it as having gone pro. So I can get into what how that sort of zip code strategy works like in more detail, but I'm just going to run through a high level of a few other sort of strategies and tactics. So another is a business network, a sort of nationalist industry, which is sort of a web of affiliated mom and pop shops, whether they're pizza parlors or plumbing things. And you start as small as you need to, connect them into the local network, offer discounts. Basically, it's like an AARP or like a NRA membership, right? So you know how if you member of the NRA, you get like a little discount on flights and like little things, right? Anyone who's a part of the network, you get discounts nationwide, start small, and if necessary, cater to people who are having some trouble. Who there's a lot of people who would be good allies, but sometimes it's just getting it when the timing is right. And part of that is knowing what's going on in your neighborhood, and that's why it's very helpful to have both a national organization and these local chapters where you are treating as KPIs, that is key performance indicators, community relationships, and that's a theme we'll get to in a bit here. But I'm going to just move on down the line. So. Another way to look at this is kind of as a Zionist movement strategy. Zionism started with 1 shekel a month international membership, and that membership didn't just get you access to one platform, but to 100 platforms. So, for example, you got free lodging when you came to town. This is something that, imagine if you were part of this network that you got free hotels in any city that you went to. Think about something like that, how useful that would be. It's almost like couch surfing, but
that's
like
what I was about to say. The infrastructure already exists in Couchsurfer.
Yep. So fine. Airbnb wants to ban anybody who thinks the wrong thing. That's fine. It's like B'nai B'rith. B'nai B'rith was lodging. They set up people in lodges. They got roommates together so that people could have more affordable housing. The moment you start thinking neighborhood, how can we own this hood? Then you can start connecting people within it. And part of the role, ultimately the way these organizations are set up with respect to, the sort of Saul Alinsky organizations and the Jewish organizations is you always have 3 levels, right? You always have the federal, the state, and the local. And, but for right now, I'm just going to say like federal and local. So for example, like Identity Europa is like a national organization. They've got some local chapters. But what I'm proposing is like very much like a neighbor. Let me flesh it out a little bit more.
So this is Identity Europa, essentially. The infrastructure already exists as you describe it. It is IE.
Well, to some extent. I think that I don't have an inside glimpse into what they're doing. I suspect that they are hitting some of these, but not nearly all. We're going to go over a pretty extensive list here. I think that with respect to that basic structure of a national network with local chapters, I think that that's a fairly common thing. But there's a lot more to it, right? Like how you structure it, like all this stuff, in my opinion, should all be structured offshore. It should all be in the Cayman Islands, so that way your beneficial ownership is totally shielded. You should really think of things more as affiliates than as chapters. And one of the things that identity groups do, there's always this concept of friends of. So if you look at any nonprofit network, what they do is they've got the national chapter, they've got the local, like they've got affiliates, but they always have these friends of organizations. You'll see that anytime you're looking at like the the infrastructure of a large nonprofit network, and those friends ofs are ways of doing favors for favors, so that people who are not in your group are you're able to provide value to them in exchange for capital. And this is something that we're going to get to in terms of funding the network a little bit later. But all right, so $1 a month membership or whatever it is, right? You get instant membership to this stuff. You get free lodging wherever you go. You get in queues for like roommates and things like that in your area. Okay, so another thing. Okay, well, let me just. Another aspect of this is the community relations strategy. So one of the things that became very popular that we covered in our stream on sort of Jewish organizations is the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relationship Council. But that's not just that doesn't just apply to Jewish groups. That applies to all identity groups. What they do is they have professionals who are dedicated to maintaining and fostering and developing critical relationships within their narrow community, and treating that as a KPI that they're responsible to the national chapter in order to earn their compensation, or in order to be eligible for different kinds of benefits, and what that looks like. So
you mentioned KPI. What is it?
That's a key performance indicator. So it's
okay.
So it's a measurement of success or failure. So one of the things that's very important to scale organizations is to have concrete yeses or nos. It's something that I think is very lacking right now in the current infrastructure. Is you don't really know if you've won or lost a particular culture war. There are no lists of demands, right? Like you don't see the 10-point bullet point list of outrageous demands that in white identity movements that you see in literally every other movement. Part of that, I'd like to believe, is because of sort of the sort of noble unwillingness to like extort people through extraordinary demands. But the other part of me thinks a lot of it is just laziness, and not like nobody sitting down and actually writing out what the 10 things are and making it really precise. The great part about having a crystal clear list of demands and a different one for each neighborhood is that it gets you in the mindset of a problem solver. So one of the reasons that I started out by talking about the cultural losses of 2017 is because I want people who want to step up as leaders, who want to change the world, to think a little bit less manifest destiny in terms of their ideology on the street, and a little bit more like a problem solver. So if you look at how any identity movement has ever taken off, it is always through doing favors for people and getting favors in return, and always be solving other people's problems, but accruing some capital at the end of it, whether that's financial capital, whether that's agreement that someone's going to vote a certain way. And even if it's super local, even if they're going to vote this way on the school board, they're going to vote this way on the city council. So one of the responsibilities of a zip code leader would be to identify certain strategic relationships, like who is on the school board, who is in the city council, who is in the church, what is my relationship? Can I get a relationship with this person? Can I do this person a favor? And what you start to establish over the course of a year of doing that is an extraordinary Rolodex of people who you've either developed goodwill for, or, and this is sort of the dirty aspect of it, they've developed dependence on you. So are you familiar with the molecular biology theory of the Black Queen?
No.
Okay, so here's a cool link. So this is sort of a play on the Red Queen theory, the Matt Ridley book. It's like an evolutionary psychology book that was really popular. I just put a link in the lobby if you want to pull it up. I think it's instructive, because this is something that is a real critical part of the philanthropy circuit, which is so the Black Queen hypothesis is an attempt to explain the loss of function that organisms experience. That is, organisms, and you might be able to explain this in finer detail than me, but basically lose genetic function over generations when they are in a symbiotic relationship with another organism who serves that function. So there are a lot of theories for why this happens, but the general idea is if a symbiotic organism is taking care of something for you, you will lose the ability to do it yourself over successive generations of selection pressure.
Absolutely. Okay, so I know I know theories that are in line with this, but I had never known about it under the name the Black Queen hypothesis. But it's very much in line with the extended phenotype of Richard Dawkins. He's covered that, and yeah, it totally makes sense. Personally, I add my own name for this idea, which is I call them phenotypic umbrellas. Which, because it comes from a thought experiment where I say, suppose that you are a creature that cannot sustain rain. However, you have access to an environment where there are free umbrellas just underground, and you can pick them, and it covers you for the rain. And I say phenotypic umbrellas are the kind of environmental stimuli that will lead you not to grow hair, not to evolve hair or stuff that would protect you from the rain, because there's something so easily accessible in your environment to protect you.
Right. Yep. So this is something, there's a lot of great examples of this in identity movement history. I mean, this is things as basic as fundraising. Like it was very common for sort of Jewish fundraisers to sort of philanthropically perform the role of fundraisers for Black movements, and then a generation later, there's simply no one in place who's able to perform that role within the Black coalition, so they become dependent on Jewish organizers. A similar thing happened with respect to the FBI and its extremist training. So basically, the ADL would do all of this free work for the FBI for like 30 years, and it would, it compiled databases, it would share it with them. In Grant Smith's book Big Israel, he chronicles how the FBI didn't want this from the ADL. They were like, please stop giving us all of this information, but occasionally it would be useful. And the ADL was just always so on top of keeping the FBI in the loop that when the FBI started experiencing budget shortages, they started apportioning personnel into other departments, and then suddenly, within a decade, it was like the ADL was running the extremism, and sort of hate watch portions of the FBI.
Acts of kindness to dominate territory.
Yes.
Wow.
And that is the weaponized philanthropy strategy. So these are, but the key to it is it's done consistently. It's done without demand for, it's done unconditionally in the beginning, at least. And it is done while simultaneously maintaining community relationships with key influencers in your neighborhood. So, if you went for, if you're a part of, whatever, the Heart Right Foundation, whatever it is, like, that you want to call your local chapter, or your local, not even chapter, because they're autonomous. This is an important thing. And this is something Alinsky stressed. He always said, organizations, not movements. Like, everything is autonomous, and it needs to have its own sort of, it can call on the network, and it has certain responsibilities to the network, but it also has its own incentive to do well. Like, they are independent in that way. So, but they take the talking points from so there's that negotiation sort of between national and local, but you really are the leader of your neighborhood. If you wanted to step up and be that, take on that role. Anyway, so I was talking about philanthropy there, but an example of that is, if you are doing morning runs, right, and you are, like, for example, Identity Europa has they do these runs where they pick up trash, right? it's very important while you're doing that, to send a weekly message to whoever's the head of the Department of Sanitation. Send a basket of flowers. Make sure they know your name and they know that you're the reason that they don't need to allocate resources to this neighborhood. And over time, that will create dependence. Dependence gives you leverage. Leverage gives you power. Now, you're also creating value along the way. So you're attaining leverage. That is, because leverage is the ability to harm someone for not doing what you want them to do. So, for example, like if there was some vote on city council and your coalition wanted to vote one way, and there were people in the sanitation department who had a guy who wanted to go the other way, you suddenly have a negotiating chip. Right. And you do this with everything. OK, you do this with everything. You do this with education. You do this with every high school, every middle school, every wrestling team, every soccer team, every chess club. You do it with you do it with the local hospitals and your KPIs that you report up, whether or not you succeeded or failed that month or that quarter when you have to do your report, which is what you're getting paid to do. Is what did you foster this? Did you develop this relationship? Did you maintain it? And you can even scorecard it. That's exactly what the APAC does. It's what ADL and Simon Wiesenthal Center do. And you have, so that way everyone knows who's in leadership, what is the state of these things. And what this allows you to do is have all kinds of really, first of all, you don't need to be connected to the national organization to do this. And this is where sort of the beauty of this organization structure comes up. The thing that is distinctly my ethnicity about, I say this meaning well. To me, it's a badge of honor. Other people may see it another way, but there is in these kinds of networks, it is often essential to have a throwaway intermediary organization that does all of the talking between the local and the national, such that there's no direct line of communication between the two. I know this seems like a lot of setup, guys, but unfortunately, this is how the world works. Trust me, I've seen enough of these, and not just that. Like, think about any big charity you've ever heard of. Think about the Clinton Global Initiative. Right. Think about the Koch Foundation. Think about all. This is the way it works. And if you're not willing to play ball on this, and you think you can just charge on out and preach the gospel without getting influence first, you're going to keep getting what you've been. I don't want to put it that way, but I think that I want to float these ideas for people to think professionally about this, because it's it's amazing to me that no one is doing this. I mean, it's just...
I'll tell you my first reaction to everything you say. First, it's fascinating. I get to understand a part of the world which I discarded all my life. All my life, I've seen these evil whores in academia coming to me and explaining to me that they wanted their fucking pamphlets about bike security. They wanted me to go into elementary school children classes and where I was doing education about sciences, and I was the funny scientist coming into the class. And they wanted me to pass their fucking pamphlets. And every time I've seen these things, I was like, no, you won't impose this on me. I was an agent of resistance in a world exactly like you described, with people trying to get leverage on me. I've always rejected it. Now, I will not reject yours, because I think you are giving us insight into how all of this works. And I've never been really interested in knowing how it works. To me, it's all crap. But it seems to be the kind of crap that you need to do to have real life effect on our society.
Yes. So what I was just about to introduce is the concept of the shell company, so to speak, right? So this is the intermediary organization that affiliates in the network interface with, that does not, so that if necessary. Okay, so let me back up a second. Remember, what we are up against is people who are nearly infinitely more powerful at this moment in time in terms of institutional power, many like way more connected, and have total control of the media. So, and this media thing, I want to make a quick. This was supposed to be part of the intro, but I think now is an appropriate time to introduce this. One of the things that this strategy is geared around is that our starting position in this culture war is to communicate and amplify our message in a media ecosystem where all major media distribution channels are wholly controlled by our enemy or our opposition. The opposition will censor all narrative network nodes. It will report all information untruthfully, selectively, and with an unwaveringly one-sided bias to fit its narrative. And it will engage in the worst kinds of divide and conquer tactics to force a disavowal and a victory parade so that they can say they fucked somebody and parade the scalp, for all the normies to see so they don't try it.
Yeah.
One of the things that this organizational structure is designed to do is the ability to fold up quickly and come back online quickly so that these organizations and these relationships can continue to yield influence even when an organization gets shut down. And the role of these intermediary organizations is that those are the things that get disavowed. When, you say I have no connection to the national network and I disavow, boom. Okay, as soon as the next news cycle comes down, next news cycle,
the
boom,
same people are there.
Exactly. It's just
this is what I've seen through the emails of John Podesta. They use different names across the years, but yes, it was always the same thing, the same bunch of people.
This is part of the frame game, though. It is, you really have to understand that it is the words themselves, because the branding of the words is how search out. It's how people find you in search. It's how people find out about you through news cycles. It's how the media brands you and hate frames you, right? By instilling this tremendously negative association with this word. Okay, fine. You just set up a new word the next day. But the key thing is that organization has to be foldable, right? But you have to maintain the core infrastructure, which is why it should be kept offshore for a variety of reasons, including lawsuits and just so that people have total security. So stuff can't be whatever. Don't need to get into that too deeply in this one. Mm-hmm. I think we should also have a follow-on. There's to the extent people enjoy this episode, this is kind of a high level overview of stuff. Okay, before I get into more strategies and tactics, actually I'll do a couple more and then I'm going to run through some examples. Another thing that white identity runs into is the problem of ethnicity stacking. This is just what I call it, which is, or I should say, it's the ethnicity stacking strategy. So these organizations should include as part of their KPI metrics, as part of their key performance indicator, part of their key influencers, is to leverage existing infrastructure for all the different ethnicity groups that are afflicted with the label white. So, for example, there's already substantial infrastructure set up for Italian Americans, for Irish Americans, for Polish Americans. These are groups that have had, 70 years of existence. There are also groups that are, in varying degrees of need of assistance. Maybe they need volunteers. Maybe they need, maybe they could use, support to get a certain statue named after them in the park. Whatever it is, you get in there, right? You send that guy a box of flowers. You do favors. You say you make the introduction, and then you get the Polish group talking to the Italian group. You get the Italian group talking to the Irish group. You get the Irish group talking to the Swedish group. And what you start doing is you start creating a because this is one of the things that Ashkenazi Jews, we don't have to worry about this, right? And this is a point I made on an earlier stream with you. I think one of the reasons there's more infighting among white groups is because there is that ethnic, they are different. What's the word? Haplogroup. I mean, they're different.
They're genetically different. Sometimes there are people who are white, like the Arab and the Western European, who are Caucasian in the broad sense, yet they have completely different systems of belief. And for many in the alt-right, Muslims, living with Muslims would be as big of a problem as living with other races.
Right. Yep. But at any rate, all of those groups, when they have babies and grandbabies, all of those babies are going to be called toxic whiteness and unearned privilege and all that shit. So as far as I'm concerned, like, this needs to be pan-European and also Friendza. I mean, this is something that I think me and the chat obviously are going to have some disagreements on. I hope I can, do my best to advocate for this position. But, I do think that there is that, like, you cannot overstate the power of Friends of. I don't know any organization, including 1930s Germany, for those who are into that stuff, that ever got through without being part of a broader coalition of friends and allies. And I'll go through some case studies of that later. But the main thing here is these groups right now could be talking to each other much more than they are. I suspect that the Italian American groups have passion for their heritage. They have goals that are not being met. They have donors, like you probably have a lot of millionaires who love their Italian heritage and contribute money to Italian heritage causes. Well, if you could expand the value pie for Italians, and in return, you could also do favors for, the Poles, the Russians, or whatever, you can. This is part of the web of influence, is to connect these groups so that you start getting joint letters, so that you start having coalitions formed among them. So, for example, if there was this big stink that happened in California last year where they were going to rename Columbus Day. Did you hear about this, JF?
No.
I forget if it actually went through. The details escape me, but what I remember is that the Italian American lobby, which is very small in California, but but loud. They issued a lot of press statements and tried to get like editorials and op-eds to try to say that no, Christopher Columbus is a big part of Italian American heritage. This is horrible what you're doing to Italians. There should have been a joint letter from the Irish, from the Anglos, from the Germanics. There should have been people who should have co-signed on that letter, the same way the ADL does when Black groups or LGBT groups get like, you need to start positioning yourself as the guy who does favors for everyone in the network, so that if they mess with one of you, they fuck with all of you.
All right.
Okay.
Now, what you're presenting there, I get it, why you need professionals. This takes so much time. This is the kind of thing that I've gotten out of my life. And this takes networking and letters, and it takes people who want to annoy people.
Well, I don't see it as annoying. I mean, you're preaching the gospel. You're saving the world, and if you believe in the vision, of what'll happen if man will never reach the stars, as we covered in our earlier videos.
I like it. I'm not criticizing, by the way. I'm saying the kind of person who will do that stuff will be writing letters 24 hours a day. That they will just wake up, they will be writing letters, and they will retry when it doesn't work. And
no, JF. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Let me just get in one thing, and then I'll shut up. They're part of a gang. It's not you, right? You have your job that you are uniquely great at, right? That's a very different skill set than a biz dev type. And also you've got a lot of people who are retired, who are sort of like they're 50. I mean, people message me and they're like, sort of nearing retirement. They're scared about the world for their grandkids. They have relationships. They have networks. They have time, and they also have retirement money. They can do this. And not only that, it's fun when you do it as a group. If your Friday night get together is you meeting with 7 guys at the house and doing all this stuff together, and in between you can play, whatever, Fortnite or whatever it is, like it becomes something bigger than yourself. You're on a mission from God. Like this stuff can be very fun. like
It's
pitching
true.
this.
There's lots of people who don't make YouTube videos, but they are looking for something meaningful in their life.
And the other thing is, you're not doing anything like this is not the kind of thing. First of all, it's because it's local. It's not a newsworthy enough event for your BuzzFeeds and your Newsweeks and your New York Times. You're not going to have a big expose on this, right? It's a shitty news story. Oh, some guy at the student council was connected to some organization that was connected to some organization that was connected to some organization. Your eyes glaze over. It's one of the reasons that these other groups get away with this, because of the way it's structured. But you need to get in the game. And the other thing is, this stuff becomes financially rewarding once you have the right sort of influences. And then and again, if you are independent, autonomous, and not linked to the national network, so to speak, and can easily disavow, you can do revenue streams a bunch of different ways. First of all, you can do a revenue share as part of the national membership. But then, you can, there are all sorts of ways that you can pool together. I can get into that another time. But, if you have 10 guys in a neighborhood who are getting together every weekend to do this, in a year, you would be shocked. You will run that town, because the only other people who think that way are the people who currently run it. And most people don't want to put in the effort, but you put in that effort. That's how you do it. Anyway.
Very interesting. Maybe before we move to the next point, I will read some super chats. Augusto Pinochet sends us $50 and he sends his favorite helicopter sign. Tanst99 sends us $50 again. Spread the anti-white meme, boy. Frame Game is a godsend. And the bad virus, $50 also. Question for Patrick. I think that you are asking for Patrick Little. He says, the Holocaust narrative is crumbling before our eyes. What do we do to protect Jews, given that when the world knows... I will not read the rest, but thank you for the donation. Secret Genius. So this is why SJWs go ballistic over friends of friends. They fear other tentacles getting a grip. Successful Wheelchair says, this guy is incredible, and he compliments Frame Game. NW Dispatcher says, we need racial taxonomy transcending nationality. All right, thank you guys for the super chats. We can now move to the next part.
All right, so I've got a bunch more on strategies and tactics here, but first I want to show an example of this in action so that we can sort of return to the reason why I advocate for some of these things. So let's just take a name that everybody knows in the chat, but right, Saul Alinsky. Everyone's heard that name. To me, talking about Saul Alinsky, Saul Alinsky was not a talker. He was literally, flying to different places each weekend to do to solve problems for local communities and simultaneously organize them for power while getting his cut. That was what he was a professional doing. How much do you know about Saul Alinsky, JF?
I don't know. I know the name, but I have no idea who that is.
Okay, so he is sort of the godfather of modern community organizing. So you've probably heard the phrase community organizer. You probably know Barack Obama was a community organizer. So what do you think a community organizer does?
Oh, I thought you were about to ask, what do you think of community organizer? I was like, I shit on their entire existence. What do? They annoy me. That's the state of the alt-right. I think that there's lots of people in the alt-right who are like me. They don't really know these things. However, I remember being young and seeing community organizations in my village. My father was part of them. We were organizing baseball matches. Maybe that's what they do. Do they organize baseball matches?
No, they don't do anything for the community in terms of what they do is so if you actually want to pull back up on the screen what I just sent you in the lobby, this was the job description that for the Jewish Federation of Philadelphia that we went over on our talk about the architecture of Jewish organizations. So, we went through this. If you scroll down and you look at what the responsibilities are, the idea of it is you have your goal as a community organizer is to agitate the local community into forming an organization that achieves specific strategic goals, and not like we're going to make conditions better, but like this bill is going to get passed, this is going to get repealed, these people are going to get hired. And the job of the community organizer is to set up the organizations to get people angry about it, to get people agitated, and then to leverage specific relationships that they've developed in order to accomplish, to pull the levers of power. So I'm going to give you an example from Saul Alinsky, a very famous one, to complete my mini biography of Alinsky here. Very famous name because he trained Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton wrote her senior thesis about him. He was the guy in the 1950s and 60s who went into major cities and set up like Black power organizations and Native American power organizations and basically any non-white organization. And he would every organization would have a unique name that would be some like lovey-dovey or like steel-toed like acronym, either designed to induce empathy or fear. And what he would do is then he would leverage his strategic relationships to induce a shakedown on the local organizations until they capitulated to his outrageous demands. If you, I want to try to stay focused. There are some clips that I pulled up that if you haven't seen, JF, I think are for first timers into the Saul Alinsky, history. I think it's important to see them. I think it's going to be very red pilling to a lot of people. But I want to check in with you and kind of check the pulse. How are you doing? How's the pace of this? How are we in terms of time?
We will touch any subject you want to touch. There's no time limit. Now, I will say before you give me that link, there's a $50 super chat from Halsey. He says, I sent you a DM. You get shekels whether you read it or not. So I decided to read it. And Halsey is saying, JF, we need you on Warski Live. There's a debate going on right now. We need you to join. If you want,
do you want me to just play these Alinsky clips? I actually think that'll be hilarious. How about I just play these Alinsky clips? You can hop on Warski and because there's like about 5 minutes of video here that's really kind of amazing.
I'm not gonna go on Warski Live. We will listen to the Saul Alinsky clips, and my message to Andy is, if you want me back on Warski Live, it's $100,000 deposited in advance for the year.
That's awesome. Or you send Halsey over here. All right. So.
All right, let's look at these clips.
So I am going to send you. So let me give you the context of this, because this is Saul Alinsky. This is a thread that I did about like 10 months ago on what I call the voltage theory of victimhood, which is basically it's not thinking of victimhood as a bad thing, but as a good thing. And this is this Native Canadian Indian tribe called Saul Alinsky to get him to come to the reservation and try to get Alinsky's thoughts on how they could win power against the white establishment. So there's a series of about 4 clips here. If you want to play them, here's Alinsky's response. Now watch, he's testing them out right now to see how serious they are about getting power.
All right, you will not be hearing them, but the crowd will be hearing.
I'll know when it goes on. Yeah.
There's no such thing as usual patterns. Every pattern is just cut to fit the particular situation you've got. There are certain common things, and these are the things that I'm looking for, the common denominator. One thing being that people must want something. And if they don't want it, then you induce the appetite for it. You can't very well want strawberry shortcake if you've never eaten strawberry shortcake, you know. You at least get the flavor and the taste around. And also you start pointing out that other people have so much strawberry shortcake that they throw out half, but you don't even have any, you know. I mean, you start agitating.
All right, so we've watched the first, we watched the second one now.
Yep, here you go.
And that Indian Act determines the kind of roles that we play in Canadian society. And that Indian Act wasn't produced by Indians, but was produced by white people for Indians. Now, it takes the Canadian people to change an act in Parliament because we have no Indians in Parliament. It's all white people in Parliament. So we have to convince white people to do things for us, and this is where we get balled up.
I think the things that you want to get, the so-called positives, you take it, but instead of calling it being corrupted by white man's operations, you say, well, Medicare was something we always had in the Indian tribes. Social Security we always had in the Indian tribes and so forth. And you take these things and you stitch them. You reach far out for them in a sense. You stitch them into your own culture and you say, these were ours. And a white man developed them in a different form. And we take them. And I think when you say that, and even before you get around to that, when you come down to welfare, that the white man took away our buffaloes, he corrupted our waters, he robbed us of our lands and so forth. And therefore, instead of our taking welfare from, literally being beggars and saying, give us, support us, you know, which is what the situation when you're on welfare. You construct a whole rationale about how since all this has happened, the white man now becomes like nature. What you're really saying, is, if you really want to talk straight on it, is he robbed us of this stuff. He was a bunch of bastards in doing it to us, and the least he owes us is welfare. And goddamn it, we'll take as much of it as we can get.
So he's really like your games of framing. He's really into reframing.
Yes. Well, in the next clip, what he talks about how the whole thing is about trying to create a moral justification and then agitating around it. But if we don't have time to go through the whole thing, you can skip to the. I think it's the second to last clip, and here he talks about the importance of organizing and the nature of it, and how ultimately change is affected through leverage when you have the influence to make them to make local organizations experience pain because of something that you have the power to do or not do. So if you play the second to last clip, that might be the most efficient this time. Yeah, number 14.
All right.
They're buying it. And I see a whole portion of the youth constituency that are buying it. I hear things now around that are love and...
This is a very minute segment of the whole
it's minute now, but it's a start. It's like what you said about getting a little compromise. It's the start. And from that start, maybe something can happen.
Look.
He's laughing.
There are things you want. It comes down very simply. Do you want them? If you want them, you have to go out and get them. If you want to go out and get them, there are only certain ways that you go out and get them. If you want to sit around and talk about love, and you want to talk about Christianity, and Christians were talking about love. You know, there were hippies back. There were more than hippies. They walked into the Colosseum with the lions and the tigers and everything else and died for it. You know, for love. And Father, forgive them, etc. If you want to do it that way, I mean, go ahead. As I told you before, this is the kind of thing that the white society would love to see you do, because they know you're not going anywhere, and it means that they can go on doing what they want without being concerned about making any changes.
You don't.
They'd love to see all the Negroes in America living on their reserves.
Well, you know, you seem like a man who has no love or none of these feelings or anything, isn't it?
I have a hell of a lot more love than you have, because I'm willing to go out and get corrupted for it. I'm willing to fight for it. I'm willing to stick my life on a line on it. And you're just willing to stick around and talk about love and hippies and not do a goddamn thing.
This guy is like me when I was a surgeon. That's exactly how I lived part of my life. I was like, do you want this monkey to survive? Well, stop shaking, you idiot.
Well, that's his thing. His whole thing was like, would you, losing, would you rather win or lose with your ethical hymen intact? But this is part of a lot of what I have been proposing so far, and it's going to get deeper on this is like a lot of people have a problem with it because it is the influence game, right? And the Alinsky school of thought is like, okay. It's death if you don't do it. And do you love it enough to get corrupted for it? Like, do you love your grandchildren enough to ensure their future, even if it means that you have one, like, blot on your record, like, is there, and I see the game as being this, as requiring this necessity at this point in time. Anything that you, to the extent that these tactics seem unseemly, they are fundamentally politics. Politics is an influence game. It's a persuasion game, and the power of your persuasion has to do with how you've positioned yourself before the persuasion moment is at hand. And this is about positioning ourselves so that a year from now, we have an unbelievable infrastructure. So I want to let me give an example of Alinsky in action for you here. It shows the power of this kind of organization. So there was a famous example of Alinsky doing battle with Eastman Kodak, which was like, Kodak is like the biggest camera company, was the biggest camera company in the world. And they had a big plant in Rochester, New York. And so what happened was, as the city's black population, here, I'm going to send you this link so that if you want to follow along, you can. In fact, I think that would be good.
All right.
It's a really fascinating story, and I think once you've internalized it, you can. I just put it in the lobby. This is in his own words. An interview that he did with Playboy magazine about it in 1972. But I will be going through a combination of in his own words and some summaries of it.
He did a fart in?
Yes. Well, he threatened to do a fart in on the local Philharmonic Orchestra. It would be technically legal, but he would basically, like, he came to town with the objective of negotiating an agreement with Eastman Kodak so that they would hire more black workers. That was the demand, basically. So what happened was the white population, this was in the aftermath of the race riots in 1964.
Okay.
And as he tells it, the predominantly white liberal church clergymen in Rochester, New York, sent a personal invitation to Saul Alinsky and his organization to come to Rochester and organize the black community so that Eastman Kodak would start hiring more black people because they had a black unemployment problem. Okay, so you have the white liberals reaching out to Alinsky saying, organize the blacks, get them to really fight against Eastman Kodak because we have a real unemployment problem with the black population. So what Alinsky does is he said he'd come, but he needed a personal invitation from the black community itself. And he says at first there seemed little interest in the ghetto for organizing. But once again, the old reliable establishment, he's talking now about conservative media in Rochester, came to the rescue by overreacting and cutting its own throat. The minute my invitation was made public, the town's power structure exploded in paroxysms of rage. The mayor joined the city's two newspapers, both part of the conservative Gannett chain, that was a big family newspaper chain, denouncing me as a subversive hate monger. Radio station WHAM delivered 1-minute editorial tirades against me and told the ministers who'd invited me that from now on they'd have to pay for their previously free Sunday morning airtime. A settlement house that had pledged its support to us was promptly informed by the community chest that its funds would be cut off if it went ahead. The board retracted its support, with several members resigning. The establishment acted as if the golden horde of Genghis Khan was camped on its doorstep. So who does that sound like? That sounds like the way the media reacts to us, right?
Yeah.
So watch how he destroys them here. Okay, so he says, if you listen to the public comments, you'd have thought I spent my spare time feeding poisoned milk bones to seeing eye dogs. But it was the nicest thing they could have done for me. Overnight, the black community broke out of its apathy and started clamoring for us, meaning him, Alinsky and his gang, to come in. As one black leader later told me, I just wanted to see somebody who could freak those motherfuckers out like that. Black civil rights leaders, local black organizations, and black ministers, plus 13,000 individuals signed petitions asking me to come in. And with that kind of support, I knew we were rolling. I assigned my associate, Ed Chambers, as chief organizer in Rochester and prepared to visit the city myself once his efforts were underway. So we're gonna go into what those efforts entailed, but I want to draw a modern parallel here. The media's popularity is at all-time lows. Mm-hmm. The white working class absolutely fucking hates CNN and the New York Times and ABC and NBC. They hate them. I mean, there are so many iconic imageries of them flipping the finger and CNN shouting CNN sucks at a presidential, right? These people are angry. And if you were to try to organize in a neighborhood, like the people who are, like if there's a hate piece of media against you, there needs, if there are 10 guys assigned to that zip code, they can immediately get a pulse on where the anger is. Where is it coming from? Is it just purely decentralized individuals, or maybe there's a sufficiently large, network node of them that it seems like the entire board of this organization is angry. And if the entire board is, then you've got an institutional ally on your side. And if what you can do is, if you can roll into town with your crew of people who can do favors, or who can, or if you've got, media reach, or if you've got financial capital, whatever trading thing you have, then suddenly you can roll into town with the support already there. And what you do is you lock up these written alliances. You get the same thing. You get the signed petitions. You waive that, and that demonstrates the institutional players in town that you have an army behind you, right? Which is very important, because a lot of the tactics involve sort of feigns at boycotts, at consumer boycotts, or if you can't get a big fish, you're gonna make an example out of a little fish. Like if there's a little bike shop that you can make an example out of, you can do that. I mean, listen, this is just how it's done.
Make an example out of a bike shop.
Hey, I mean, if they're trying to attack you because of your identity, though, this is how it's done.
This is so evil.
All right. So
I imagine the young children who wanted the bike, but Frame Game is like, no, you won't have fun today. We're gonna make an example out of your bike shop.
Come to our bike shop. But that's the point, right? The point is, once you have these alliances, which you can, and oftentimes it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And when you get these hit pieces, often there will be people who will be so mad at the media that they may be willing for a short period of time, which is why you need to have the infrastructure in place. They might be able to be mobilized on the basis of that anger before that anger subsides. And that's why it's important to already have these things set up so that you can get your team in place, so that you can get the sense of who will join you, in whatever demands you're making. And you need to have a concrete list of demands, even if they're dumb stuff. And we can go over some examples of that. But let me just continue, round out this example. So Playboy asks Alinsky, how did you organize Rochester's black community? So Alinsky says, with the assistance of a dynamic local black leader, the Reverend Franklin Florence, who'd been close to Malcolm X, we formed a community organization called FIGHT, an acronym for Freedom, Integration, God, Honor, Today. We also established the Friends of FIGHT, an associated group of some 400 dues-paying white liberals. So right, so look at the structure here, right? You've got Saul Alinsky and his national network, and you've got a local black church, and then you've got 400 dues-paying white liberals who are paying the black church to pay Alinsky, right? So, if oftentimes if you're solving problems for the local community, then you can treat this as a revenue stream, right? And this is often how you can this is how this is how you can turn it into a business. This is how the early stages of the diversity industry got commercialized. It was through a lot of these favors for favors, and then suddenly you're an organization, and now you're regularly kind of doing business with local organizations, and you're sharing in their value pie, or you can extract a profit sharing or some agreement that it rewards your effort for 5-year annuity going forward, however you want to structure it. Anyway, so he said we had a wide range of demands. I'm sorry. The 400 dues-paying white liberals provided us with funds, moral support, legal advice, and instructors for our community training projects. We had a wide range of demands, of which the key one was that Kodak recognizes the representatives of the black community who are designated as such by the people, and not insist on dealing through its showcase of black executive flunkies, basically letting black people self-determine with respect to their unions. So Kodak said that FIGHT had no legitimacy and the company would never accept it. So he says that meant war, and we dug in for the fight, which we knew would not be an overnight one. We realized picketing or boycotts wouldn't work, so we began to consider some far-out tactics along the lines of our O'Hare shit-in, which was at the O'Hare airport. And at one point, we heard that Queen Elizabeth owned some Kodak stock, and we considered charting an airplane for 100 of our people and throwing a picket line around Buckingham Palace on the grounds that the changing of the guard was a conspiracy to encourage picture taking. This would have been a good attention-getting device, outrageous enough to make people laugh, but with an undertone serious enough to make them think. So this is an edge that we had in 2016 that I think was a little bit lacking in 2017, right? Like if you think about the glorious fun of the meme war in 2016, and again with Charlottesville, it was serious, but was there an undertone of did anybody laugh? And I'm not saying that they always need to be this way, but was there plausible deniability? Could you slip the message in through humor somehow? Were there funny signs at all? Little things like that can go a long way to mobilizing allies. So anyway, they ended up ultimately winning the fight through a combination of threats. Like I mentioned with the fart in they were going to do to the local Philharmonic, but also by proxy wars with local churches. Basically, they found all this. They did an analysis of who the shareholders were of Kodak stock, and they found that they could actually exert shareholder pressure on Kodak by gathering proxies, which just means the ability to vote on your behalf and assigning the proxies to FIGHT, which was sort of by then perceived positively by a lot of these white liberals who held a lot of Kodak stock. And ultimately, it was the threat of this corporate activism that forced Kodak to accede to all of their demands. But it's a combination of all these factors that I'm trying to get at, right? Like how many different organizations, cultural, business, how many are all involved there? You've got the black churches, you've got the black workers, you've got the white liberals, you've got the white businessmen, you've got the conservative white businessmen, you got the white liberals, you've got shareholders from around the country, you've got all these relationships to manage. Now, obviously, the movement isn't in a position to pull off something like that, but you can do it at a smaller scale in smaller fights and smaller zip codes, and you need to get in the game. I mean, if there's a reason that the right has lost all these cultural conflicts in the past 50, 60 years, it's because there's no one competing on this basis. And if you pick relatively favorable zip codes, you will pick places where you're pretty sure to win, and then you can start scaling up. anyway, do you need a pause for super chats, or am I?
Yeah, we can have a quick look at the new super chats. Now, I will say this is something I don't know anything about. Everything you're talking about to me is like what I call in real life penetration. And this is a world I've isolated myself from progressively more and more. And I suspect that the alt-right is particularly weak on that point because of the autism, the rampant autism in the alt-right, which has been joked about, but seriously, I think that there's a higher proportion of autistic people in the alt-right, and that's why they're so strong on the internet. I see the people who watch my show. It's the same people every night. They're there 1 hour before the show, and they're chatting on the chat between them. Do you think it will constitute a problem, the fact that the alt-right is much more keyboard affectionate than any political movement that ever existed in the history of humanity?
I think it can be a real asset because of how quickly the internet can be mobilized to generate pressure points, right? Like, one thing that both SJWs and the alt-right has in common is the tendency to raid corporate Amazons and Google. Like basically the ability to like summon a lot of social media hashtag pressure and a lot of like often these are combated through news cycles that will demonize the pressure and essentially alleviate it on behalf of the marketing teams of the corporations. But if you could have a 1-2 punch of having this intense internet energy combined with boots on the ground, then you can actually start promising influence on social media. You can start promising promotion. You can start saying, listen, if you sign in onto our petition, we're going to make your company famous in the hashtags. You're going to get $100,000 of free advertising, because we can get all of our people to lionize you. There'll be memes about you. I'm saying these things can be creative assets, but if you don't have real world organizations, you can't harness them beyond that initial energy push. And the problem is, these organizations that have adapted to the pure internet fire and fury. I mean, that was a relatively new thing in 2015 and 2016. But now with shadow banning and getting rid and stunting certain hashtags and the increased rules against harassment and bullying and things like that, there are limits to that, and it would just be so much more powerful if you could also trade it as an asset. But to do that, you need a personal relationship, which is why you need community relations councils.
All right.
In my opinion.
So Frederick White says, I've been thinking what Frame Game is saying for quite some time. As whites, we need to listen. We need to get in action. We need to organize. Purple Pill Guy says, how do we even find each other in real life without risking everything? This question needs to be answered before we move on to community organizing. That's a good question.
Well, I mean, I think that to the extent that you regularly chat with somebody, I don't find it hard to get a pulse on these things just by sending out a message. I mean, maybe I have sort of the benefit of a lot of reach to be able to do that. But, I think just saying your general area, I mean, you'll be able to, if you're online for more than a couple months, you'll sort of quickly pick up on at least a couple people who are in your general area, provided you're not in a super rural zip code. But even then, there's forums. I mean, there's a lot of places that people congregate and trade information that doesn't dox someone per se to know that they live in the greater Los Angeles area.
Well, as soon as you're talking about community organizing, you have people who have to go out of anonymity. I mean, it could be the people who have to register the local chapter. You're going to have your real name on this. If you can't go out for white culture and white existence in our world because it's too intimidating, it's a problem. I think that people like me can play a role there, because people like me will regularize this idea within the next few years. I'm going to do only that. It's going to be over and over until people are tired of hearing, yes, JF, we want white to exist. So I think that this can change, but I agree with the question. In the current state of the situation, there could be people who are pushed away from community organizing because they can't go out with their real name.
Sure, but you also wouldn't need to. I mean, only the local leader would really be, I mean, you'd be putting your face out there. But if you were getting together with guys in your neighborhood on Fridays and things like that, you don't need to necessarily, use first name, last name. I mean, there are ways that you could, kind of check it out, and provided you trust the people in your neighborhood, which is obviously a threshold consideration. But after you've gone through a number of, iterations of maybe talking to them on Hangouts or talking to them on Skype or whatever, and maybe having a preliminary couple, meeting or two, and you get together for, a video game night or whatever, and then you do a little bit of work for the movement, and then, and now you're part of a team. It's your hood. But look, obviously that is a limitation, but it becomes less of a limitation the more financing there becomes for it. And the best way to get financing is to actually be a part of a broader network, especially if your name for the local organization has nothing to do with whatever national organization it is, right? Like, it's autonomous. There would be, unless something really confidential leaked, like, there would be no real tie between you and that. And if there was one discovered, you would be able to immediately disavow and say, well, I didn't know that. Well, that's what it was about. I never made contact with those people. And then, it folds, and then, and then that gets us right back to the other thing. Like, that layer of plausible deniability is very important for this. And you could toe in the water. I don't think that what we're talking about right now is like even, super doxy. So you wouldn't need your first name, last name on a national register. That thing would be in the Cayman Islands anyway, which would just be for, but whatever. I mean, the whole point is, I think that there are a sufficient number of people whose names and faces are out there who might be interested in just kind of experimenting with this sort of thing without necessarily tying it to, like, the alt-right but just kind of like, I'm happy to talk to people individually, who have questions about this kind of stuff, or explore it more in another public stream or whatever. But this is also a way of fostering social relationships and just making friends and being a part of a bigger community. There's a lot of goals that this accomplishes, apart from the purely strategic.
All right. Undefined says the problem is thinking of a moral indignation to rally behind. Most don't believe in the soft genocide. That's also a very good thought. The big problem is that there are no situation of, like, extreme confrontations that really are newsworthy. Often the anti-white thing is really in the background. It's hard to see. And to that undefined, I would answer, well, you need to take the microaggressions, if you will, that are done against white people, and you need to reply. You need to make it clear that, no, you won't sit down in front of such aggression. And then you'll see that in our society, the hate will build up against you. And with the hate and with the hateful repression that you'll be the victim of after, then there might be some major news event emerging from it. That would be my view of it. That's what I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
All right.
But the way this would be is, like, I mean, what you're really trying to do here is mobilize, like, friends of is a big part of it. So say, for example, there's something anti-white that happens in your town. So, like, whether it's explicitly anti-white, or you can even use, like, Trump as a proxy, right? So, like, there was like this crazy example of, like, textbooks related to Trump that were portraying him as a racist and kind of vilifying white people by proxy. And I pulled up a link to it. Did you see this? I'll show it to you. But while I'm pulling that up, like, so if there is some action in your town that is very clearly anti-white, and you can tell by the comment sections, you can tell by the local Twitter stuff that there is, that there are dozens of people who are very angry about it. It would be potentially quite, that is a great moment in the funnel to post a link to a local action petition to make sure this never happens again in your hometown, right? And so what you're not necessarily linking that to like affirmative white identity, but what you're doing is like what the ADL does. You say never again. In this, like, you don't need to be afraid. You join us. We're gonna hang out on Friday, or even if you don't do that, like, get the email addresses, get them in the funnel, get the contact, and then send a message. Then you've got. If you do that on everything in your town that's anti-white SJW, within a month you'll have at least 100 like people that you've at least got like leads on potentially. Some of them may be interested, and then you establish a relationship, and the thing starts to scale. And the whole point is like you're really scaling for like a year from now. Like the goal is to have organizations set up. That are, and meanwhile you're making friends and you're getting involved without being tied to the alt-right per se. It's just your secret is that you know a guy who knows a guy, if to the extent that you want to use this organization that you're running or a part of to accomplish national goals, like the national committee and resources can be allocated to help you do that.
And with the Saul Alinsky tactic, we could say any act of affirmative action, for example, you could reframe it as this is an attack on white candidates who were deserving. So you can take a lot of events that are not typically covered as anti-white, and we could reframe that.
Yep. Concerned parents, right? For what's happening with your children, right? I mean, all of these places, and the idea is, that they, because it's layered, it's you're not trying to like convince people, right? You're not going out into the street and like blowing your local cred by like trying to get someone to join like, something that's perceived as extremist. What you're doing is you're developing the personal relationship first. And once you're in the habit of, once you've got the goodwill, once you've got the relationship, if it then comes out that you believe this way about this certain thing, oh, that's no big deal. If it then comes out that you believe, then you're boiling the frog, so to speak. And it's a way to become a community leader while simultaneously helping a movement. And it's also fun to think about. Like, I mean, I can think of a ton of, like, if I were to just think of people in, I'm in New York City. But, it would be fun to like, be hanging out with people and being like, okay, this person runs the Brooklyn Academy of Music. What favor can I do for that? Like, let's just say, is this person like, has this person written something in the past? Like, have they, maybe they're libertarian, maybe they're something that's like adjacent, right? And you get your closest leads, you develop the relationship, and then you just say, make it a personal challenge. Like, can I get this guy's, contact info? Can I get him to send me a thank you thing? And you hold yourself accountable to the organization and set growth goals.
Any excuse to build a new relationship, and you just use these excuses to build more and more.
Right, and the thing is, this can help you in your personal life if you decide you want to cut ties with the organization at a later point too. Like, this is also just good social ladder climbing. But the whole thing is like, you are not going to get like, the best way to get power is if you already have power. And like, if you're trying to change like your local city, if you're trying to change your state, it really helps to have control over like local city ordinances. If you're trying to, enact some federal change, it helps to have some control at the state level. Like, all these things filter up. And if to the extent that you can gamify this, I actually think that if there's a leader who has already got their identity out there who would want to run something like this, it would be actually a lot easier to coordinate than I've made it sound. I mean, this is kind of like a lot of this all at once. But there are ways that you can gamify it too. And like if you're sharing a common revenue pool, you can have a tournament structure so that there's a bit of a game aspect to like who, the more you accomplish for your organization, the more the greater you're sharing the revenue. And I mean, there's ways to sort of structure both sort of financially and as a honor thing that you are kind of like the celebrity of the moment for having been like the best guy for the movement. Like there's lots of ways to do that, and a lot of people who I think would find a tremendous amount of meaning and pride in being honored for something like that.
All right. Secret Genius says white identity politics are defensive in nature. I think this mitigates the ethical issues about using Alinsky's tactics somewhat. DP says JF loses 10 hit points for not knowing Alinsky. Well, guys, I'm not an American, and I don't know about you guys. I could name you a series of Quebec personalities that are pretty much like Alinsky. And so I'm just part of a different history. That's why I ignore a lot of the cultural references that are from America. I just lived there 5 years, I believe. Undefined says, so you're saying to rally, protest around CNN, saying you stop anti-white propaganda? It would be hard not to come off as white supremacists, though. So what should we do about the labeling of people systematically as white supremacists, Frame Game?
Well, the bigger your, the more one of the defenses to that is to disavow, right? Like that is the sort of Breitbart. That is kind of how Breitbart sort of operates. Is they're sort of on the edge of it, and whenever they get associated with a Jared Taylor type, they disavow, but they go up to it. I think that there is. That to call out something as being anti-white, or particularly as just being general discrimination, there are ways to frame things that are in a equalitarian way. That it really just depends on your leverage, in that jurisdiction. Like, is CNN going to cover? So, one flashpoint. I mentioned this earlier, but I am going to pull it up now.
One thing you can do is every time you talk about some anti-white thing that you would want off of our society, you could say, we demand the same rights for white people than Native Americans. You could actually always include a component of equalitarianism, as you point to it.
All right. Well, look, I mean, why is it that this is happening right now on the Upper West Side, New York. And the white parents are livid at the diversity programs that are happening in New York right now. But even though there was some press at them calling them racist, the fact is the white parents are probably going to win that battle because they have a shit ton of leverage. They're wealthy, they're connected, like they are. If they mass leave the Upper West Side, that is bad news for De Blasio. So, I mean, a lot of these media attacks really come down to just how much leverage do you have in that jurisdiction. So,
on the regular chat, Frame Game, an amazing idea, and this is why I like this kind of discussion with you, is that we see some genius pop out. I think this is a great idea by Jan Moon. He says we need the Elon Musk Pravda/Rate My Professor like website, naming all the anti-white professors. And I would go further, naming all of the anti-white cases in our society, no matter whether they are professors or businesses or politicians. That would be awesome.
Yeah. No, it definitely would be.
People would compete to record their professor saying some anti-white thing so that they can show it to the world through this website.
Look, that's true. Part of it is also inflating the power of that phrase, that phrase anti-white. But a lot of it, when you've got, there are a lot of ways to blend the race issue in with respect to coalition forming that doesn't, that's sort of touch and go. Like it's not the touchstone, but it's not the cornerstone, but it's sort of like a touchstone on it. Like so your message gets through, but you also sort of focus on the children. But then you also have these people now in your, attached to your organization. And if we can get this strategic goal accomplished, like, maybe you guys can help us out with the bake sale or whatever it is, right? So, I was just thinking as a mental exercise, and I haven't been through this yet, but I thought it might be fun to do live. I just sent you a link to a recent news article about the Pearson textbooks for how they're reporting on Trump. So these are the new Advanced Placement Honors American History textbooks at a high school in Minnesota. And the way that it describes Trump in this history textbook is saying here in the outline, Trump tapped into the sense of an alienation, most of all white, poor, and working class voters. He had not very hidden racism connected to a significant number of primary voters. Trump's supporters saw the vote as a victory for people who, like themselves, had been forgotten in a fast-changing America, a mostly older, often rural or suburban and overwhelmingly white group, people who are afraid of ethnic diversity. So this kind of hate-framing rhetoric, it would be very easy to, as a sort of alt-light alliance, to kind of say, well, listen, we're not even making a position on white identity in this particular campaign, but you are being attacked on the base, this is vilifying a racial group, and it's your children who are suffering on the basis of this. And, getting the parents involved, in letting them know there's a place where they can channel their anger, and that you will be the representative to that. You will write, you'll write the letter, you'll show up at the PTA meeting, or you'll show up with an army of people. And this isn't a place Antifa would show up at, right? Like, that's the whole thing. When you do these big events, you do attract, media attention, and Antifa and SJW shut it down people. But these people aren't going to show up to like a local school board stuff like this. But what you're doing is you're shifting the jurisdiction. And once you own the jurisdiction, then you can begin to exert influence, right? And then you've also got people whose trust you've won. So they no longer sort of, it slips the guard, so that when you express views that that may be more positively pro-white, it's within the ecosystem of defending people against anti-white attacks on them.
All right. The Fiend says, look at the Tommy Robinson protest. It's possible to get our side out on the streets. Padre Speaks says, Frame is nailing the truth to the wall. Without real-world action, it won't change. The long game has to be played to return to preeminence. Frederick White says, Frame is helping meth-addicted whites in Indiana a way into a community to organize whites. I think that's what Frames was mentioning. Anyone who's in a situation of needing help, the community could see it as potentially a good bridge building, right?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It connects you to, like I said, there's dividends to this apart from political, but there are also a lot of lost souls, a lot of people who came to this because they have been beaten down, because they have sort of given up a certain amount of hope about the world. I mean, the fact is, knowing what we know, I think everyone has gone through that phase, and not everyone gets out of it, in a healthy way. I mean, this kind of thing can afflict you for years, but feeling like you are taking action is the antidote to black pill. Like, the fact that you're doing everything you can do, or you did one thing today, I mean, it's a way to really feel like I mean, it's something you can be proud of, and pride is exactly what is needed. It's the antidote to the shame of shame of what's happening, shame of how powerless you are, being shamed for just belonging to a group, and that historical sins and all that stuff. Like having that pride and also just doing favors for people makes people feel good too. But knowing that favor is now connected to something that you might be able to parlay into something that'll help your children for generations to come, and you're part of a much broader network of people, and then sharing tips and tactics and introducing people to one another. And I mean, there's a lot of ways that this can scale if it becomes something that people find fun to do.
All right. Kauka says, slightly off topic, do you think it's objectively true that whites are more innovative than all other races? If so, why are they? If not, I guess you're welcome to the donation. Well, I have a subtle view on this. First, it's definitive that white civilization has led to innovations that were unmet everywhere else, and that was met on other places of the earth through copying white civilization. So yes, there is something in our civilization that is good for innovation. Now, I wouldn't say necessarily that if you take a white person and an Asian and you raise them in a cage, that the white will be more innovative when he becomes an adult. I think it's much more complex, and it goes to the idea of all type, which is the genetic mesh of white society. I think that whites create conditions in their society that has historically led to great advances in individual rights, great advances in technology, and great advances in economic development. Now, what is the biological feature of whites that led to this? I don't know. It could be their love of capitalism. It could be something else. It could be IQ. I think that the problem of innovation is a very complex problem. It's like having all the right ingredients show up at the right time, in the right place, with the right people. So I would put on the side any sort of very simple statements such as, oh yeah, whites are more innovative. But I think that it is observably true that white civilization has led to lots of innovation. However, how did we do that? I don't know for sure. And yeah. Quebec, $50. Thank you so much. He says, I think many in the alt-right have problems relating to the normies. Once you go full edgelord, it's hard to pull back. Yeah, there is this idea, there is this point of no return, given the aggression that the alt-right receives and the fact that they get called white supremacists without even saying that they are, or without even suggesting that they are. And so the people who cross the alt-right threshold are often, they made the last step, and it's like it's hard to go back to normie considerations such as community organizing. But I think it's good to learn about it, and I'm very interested in this. I don't think I could play a role in a community organization such as those described by Frame Game. I'm just too autistic. I would be a weight to carry in these organizations. However, if in my role as a YouTuber, I could favor the emergence of these, I would be very interested. Undefined says, I think the easiest thing would be to plaster 20 or 30 posters labeling a local store, college as being explicitly anti-white. Link times to protest on the poster, etc. All right, so that's it for the super chat. So Frame Game, did we have another subject to cover today?
Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff that I think just because we're coming up on maybe 2 hours, we can table for another time. But I think you wanted to talk about this article at some point, the 9 things alt-right men need to know. Is that, did you want to chat about that?
Yeah, I read this wonderful article by this beautiful lady. I don't know what's her name, but I'm willing to read anything that she writes. And she says 9 things alt-right men need to know. All right, beautiful lady in the wheat field, show me what I need to do as a man.
You're so French.
So she she has 9 tips, and all of them are brilliant stuff that I've been thinking so much, and I've been wanting to say that to my chat many times. And so I'm just gonna go over our 9 points. I agree fully with what's being said here. So one, aesthetics matter more than optics. This is a beautiful phrasing for what I've always thought, which is because I was in the people were asking me about optics versus non-optics. Should we cock for the image? And my view has always been you should care about the image, but this doesn't mean to sacrifice the fundamental ideas that are motivating you. However, you should abandon ideas that are not fundamental and care about your fundamental idea. What is it? How do you want to represent it? And then the question of making it beautiful visually and in audio, that's important, but it's not at the sacrifice of the importance of the message.
Yeah. Beauty is such an important thing. It was actually really fascinating when I read like Trump biographies during his run up, like how obsessed he is with just beauty. And I think that is a big part of the Trump aesthetic. I mean, not only did the guy, like buy Miss America, pre-swimsuit ban, and like is obviously surrounds himself with beautiful women and like expensive things, but like he's there is an aesthetic to it. Like there's a unifying like global aesthetic to Trump things. They tend to be larger than normal. They tend to be somewhat gaudier, but extremely clean. Like there's like often that sort of gaudiness kind of has like
too
some
much
cheap or some cheap interior, like it's a giveaway. But like they, I have not stayed in the Trump hotel, but I know people who have, and they weren't even Trump supporters, and they told me like they were like when they went into the bathroom, it was like, wow, you just have to respect like the attention to detail and the fact that like the guy clearly works hard. Like the fact that he surrounds himself in beauty.
Trump is someone who sees the brand as a leverage tool. I read about the events that led to his quasi bankruptcy and how he got out of it. Essentially, if Trump had not put the word Trump on his hotels and on his stuff, he would be bankrupt. What happened is that he bankrupt himself, so he kind of spent more than he could spend, which normally leads to bankruptcy, but he linked all of his investment to his name. And so he was unkillable, because if you were getting rid of Trump, you were getting rid of the name and of the brand. And he used that to renegotiate his debt with his funders. And that's just evil and beautiful. I really love it. He's an example of accumulating unseizable, I don't know if it's the word, unseizable capital, which is the name Trump and the media and all of this. If you make a bankruptcy, it disappears. It's not yours, and the bankrupt leaves with it. And his founders didn't want that. And so they renegotiated. They said, okay, you won't pay us back all the money, but we'll get some of it at least. We'll get a piece of that brand that you built.
Yeah, and that's the concept of goodwill in bankruptcy. Actually, it's this kind of difficult to quantify, but extremely important, part of the analysis for the value of assets in a corporate bankruptcy. But it's but the fact is, like, Trump treats his name as like a huge part of his aesthetics. Like, he makes sure his name is presented in big, beautiful letters. Now, a lot of people think it's gaudy, but the fact is, it's usually not fake gold. And like he even writes about this in his book. I think it's Think Big and Kick Ass in Life. And he talks about how he came up with the name for Trump organization, right? And he was thinking about all these different names for the company, and he wasn't going to call it Trump at first. And he was saying, people were saying, well, you shouldn't do that. That's too narcissistic. But then he said to himself, as a personal motivation, no, there were two things. One, like knowing that his name was on it made him feel like really invested in it, and the other thing was like he had to live up to it, and it also made him feel bigger than himself to think that it was like the Trump organization. So like you're bigger than you are your brand, and the aesthetics of you personally are the aesthetics of the brand, and vice versa. But you really can't overstate the power of aesthetics. I mean, it's so powerful.
All right. Our second point is not so important. This one I don't really care about. She says, not everyone is an erudite gentleman, nor should they be. She essentially makes the point that we shouldn't force people to wear suits. But I'm not aware that the alt-right forces people to wear suits. I mean, as far as I know, I'm the only one who forces himself to wear suits on my show. I've never heard of this being any problem. Did you understand this paragraph?
Yeah, I think she was referencing one of the lines that I mentioned about like professional meetings, and I mentioned as a preliminary structure to sort of base it off of typical corporate structure that you have quarterly meetings, and you don't show up in board shorts like you treat it as a professional thing. I'm not saying people have to wear a suit every day, but for an organization like this, I think that there is an element to going through the motions of putting the suit on and doing that. I think gets you in the right mindset for thinking about the organization as a professional one, and not one that you just kind of like do from your computer. Like there's an element of it that it really changes your mindset to be in the suit. And to the extent you're doing like a quarterly meeting for something like this, I would expect executive management to take it seriously enough to do that.
That's true. I agree that wearing the suits is a good practice. In business and in the sales industry, they often say dress like the job you want, not like the job you have. I think it's the same thing for even community organizing and media. You should always outdo it. There's no such thing as outdoing. So the South is for Southerner. That's a point that, again, this one didn't touch me much. I think our more interesting points come later. But she essentially says, don't concede territory. The people of the South, don't be a secessionist of America and say, oh, Dakota is going to be our place and we're abandoning California. Personally, I think that as an intellectual, I like to study hypotheses. And so for me, it's important to study possibilities of seceding from parts of America. And this includes making a choice of where we go. She says, don't do that. She says, consider that all of America is yours, and that the people who are victim of anti-white oppression in the South, they are probably your best ally because they are at the forefront of the war that we're currently living.
Yeah. Where do you find the balance, JF? Because a lot of people talk about the balkanizing. Do you think that has zero merit to it, or?
Personally, I'm a big advocate of balkanizing and secession. I was before the alt-right even existed. I've always been for a secession of America and Canada into small the provinces and states going on their own or going in small groups of states. I think it's too big of a system, and there's no way democracy can work in the way we intend it to work in such big groups.
Yeah.
In fact, I've always been also against the EU. I've always been a big fan of small. I think a good nation with a single culture and an homogeneous culture can survive very well at 10 million people and can thrive and can specialize. You look at these small European countries, they don't do everything. They do a couple of things very well, and it's enough to sustain 10 million people.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Shitposting isn't going to save the world. So that I agree. I mean, I agree, but not to the point of shaming people who do shitposting. but it's not enough to do just that. That's a good point. I agree with her. Do you?
Yeah, well, that was the point of one of the sort of tactical angles of this is that shitposting was extremely innovative in 2015, 2016. Right now, success, in my opinion, calls for dynamism, a sort of ping to parallel tracks where there's a combination of shit posting and actual vibrations on the ground. I have some weird theories on this. Like, I actually think that virtual reality might be one of the best things that'll ever happen to the nationalist right wing, because it might allow people to sort of meet up in person without being doxxed with a real avatar. But that's for another night.
Interesting hypothesis. I've never thought about it. So the 5 point, that's the most important. This is what I want to tell to everyone who engages with my content. Stop trying to purge people. The number of you guys who are telling me I shouldn't have XYZ on my show, I shouldn't have Jews, I shouldn't have women. First, just know that the momentum that the alt-right has acquired at some point in history, around 2016, made it an appealing movement for lots of people. And if it was appealing to me ever, it is solely because of the intellectual openness that it was allowing. When you were going to Reddit, the Donald, and when you were going to 4chan, everything was allowed and there was no taboo. Now, if you guys want to create new taboos, all that will result in is make your community smaller and smaller and more exclusive and more exclusive. If that's what you want, make your own club, but that's not a good growing political movement that starts saying we don't want to hear from that type of people or that other type of people. You should want to hear any idea. That doesn't mean you're forced to agree, and that doesn't mean you won't offer a rebuttal, but you should want to hear anyone who's able to frame a thesis, and maybe you'll believe it, maybe you'll contest it, but you should engage with it.
Well, I echo that 100%. I mean, that's, the philosophy that I've presented here has been very much about friends of organizations and a big tent philosophy. Even if you don't consider them one of you, so to speak, is there a role for friends of that you can find in your ideology? And is there a way that you can make it fit? And to the extent that you can, recognize that that's probably going to help you in your path to power. If that's not what you're after, if you want to stand on principle and that's its own sort of form of masochistic pleasure in a way. But if you're trying to win, generally speaking, the bigger your army, the sharper your sword.
And a very good point again. That's also a philosophy I've been going by. There is no such thing as punching right. There is no such thing as an alliance of people we can't criticize. I've seen people for days now, and they're still traumatized by it on my channel. They complain against Lauren Rose for making statements disagreeing with Patrick Little or questioning Patrick Little in the first place. And then some people pretend that there was a tweet somehow expressing some form of opposition to Patrick Little. Hey guys, it's not by not questioning your own strategies that you're going to evolve. If there are people in the right who have an intelligent point to make about how Patrick Little could have done better, I want to hear it. That doesn't mean I will believe it, and that doesn't mean I will stand by their statement, but I want to hear it.
Yeah. I think, for me, this one's tough because, I think because of maybe, my own sort of identity stuff, there's I feel like any sort of negative criticism that I put on somebody that isn't very clearly playful, could be kind of viewed as subversive and things like that. But that's, I think, there certainly needs, I agree with you that there certainly needs to be some energy keeping people in check, if for no other reason than just to evolve and test and improve.
Absolutely. And that's another philosophy I went by. And that's why I really love this girl. I mean, other than the fact that she's beautiful, she says, get a thesaurus. Stop using words you know will get you banned on leftist social media platform. There are 1,000 ways you can say something. There's only 5 or 6 ways in which it will get you banned, and then there's 900 ways in which it will not get you banned. Be intelligent, use humor, package your ideas into jokes so that you have plausible deniability against an examiner, either for hate speech laws or for the censors who work for YouTube. You can package it so easily. And Frame Game, you've actually stepped on a stone. Last week, you said a couple of things that you were not being hateful, but you were quoting Moon, who was being hateful. And I told you, you cannot even quote someone like this. You have to rephrase it and make it funny.
I felt really dumb about that.
And so I had to spend 3 hours after re-editing, beeping you, and then re-uploading. That kills me when I have to do this, but I know it was not your fault. You didn't.
I'm sorry, man. I actually, there was a moment this stream where I was going to say one thing, but I was like, you know what? Let's just be safe. So I'm testing. I'm training. All right, my AI algorithm is training. But speaking about this subject, I forget if we did this in our stream on Jewish organizations. But have you ever seen the hate speech database of the ADL?
Oh my God, no.
I just put it in the lobby. I think it would be fun for the chat to see it because it gets to this question of like, so her what she's advocating for is, to just like don't use the words you know are going to get you in trouble. But the ADL continually adds words to the. So just check out how many hate words there are before you even get to the letter A. Like scroll all the way up. Like here are all the hate words. Okay. Like we haven't even gotten to the letter A yet.
They own half of the numbers already.
Yeah.
Wow. 100% is a hate symbol.
1, 2, 1, 3. Like it's just.
That's the number of eggs I buy. Shit. I didn't know.
Yeah. So there is this evolutionary arms race between the English language and how much bandwidth the ADL website has.
Oh my God, those are absolutely stunning. All right. Another thing that I've been going by. Quit pretending you don't want women talking about politics. Yes, you do. You need women to talk about politics. You may not want them in politics or to hold office. Please, though, stop with the ridiculous assertion that you want women to stop talking about current affairs or identity issues. It's an aphrodisiac when a woman agrees with you about topics that you care deeply about. For her to understand what concerns you and why is a comfort to you. That's exactly what I've been advocating for. I've been wanting a female co-host because it is so complementary. There are things you will feel when Lauren says some things that I cannot make you feel because I'm just this French guy in a suit.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree on this one. I actually did, back when Sargon did his 8 questions for the alt-right, one of them was like, should women have a place in politics? And my position on it was yes, and that was one of the ones that was actually most contentious of all the questions. But I respect anyone's beliefs on that thing. But me personally, I mean, they're just so powerful. Like I'm not to be like if you use them well, but like the fact is, a beautiful woman will open doors that an army could not.
Absolutely. And some people point out, well, we don't have a woman who come on the show and who can blast me intellectually like a big revelation like Richard Spencer could or Styx could. It's not that dramatic, one. And secondly, there's no reason not to work on it happening. And on some women, with practice, eventually mastering high-level intellectual discussion. And it's okay if the level is a little lower on average. What I consider that all of the women who have come here, even the feminists, they add structured good points, even if I disagree in some instance, especially with the feminist. I mean, it was not bad intellectual content because it was leading me to make the proper rebuttal that I wanted to make, and it was clear and the ideas were well laid out.
Yeah, well, Lauren's particularly fantastic, but there's also, I mean, Lana from Red Ice. I mean, would you rather have Marine Le Pen and all? I mean, there's a lot of people, women in politics, who I think were substantially better. Even just for a number of reasons, even leaving aside aesthetics that I think are very powerful.
Absolutely. And finally, the 9th point. I agree, not strongly, but I agree loosely with the point. She says Jews aren't that powerful. I'm not suggesting you should give them a single moment of respite from pointing out each and every instance they exercise what influence they've been permitted to have. In other words, she's saying don't be too black-pilled about the Jewish question. It's true that there are independent creators and there are people independent from the systems we described. Somehow they often get slandered in the media, but these personalities like Donald Trump, they can rise from the kind of attempt at slandering, and especially when the slandering fails, they look even more like heroes.
Yeah, I don't think that she saw our stream from a couple weeks ago, to be honest. But look, I mean, I think that point could have been made if it had just been rephrased to say, like, don't let it get you down. Like, recognize that there are limitations. They're not all powerful. Like, there's a lot more nuance to it than you probably think. Like, don't get like so myopic with like a single worldview. Like, all that stuff I think is reasonable. But the way it's framed is like, I do wonder just how far she got into our stream.
I was actually kidding when I was hitting on the photo. I thought it was a random photo, and I thought that the person who wrote this was a guy. But no, it's actually a female author. She's named Sophie Schwindling. I thought it was a picture that was found somewhere on the internet, and that this was yet another guy posing on the internet as a girl.
You thought that all along?
I thought that all along because my first reading of this article this afternoon, I actually looked at the bottom and look at how difficult her name is to find. I was like, okay, she's not Sun Tzu, The Art of War. She's not the Republic Standard Web Shop. What is her name? And at the top, her name is not there. At the bottom, her name is not there. And I was like, okay, this photo, it must be a joke. She's not really a girl. And then I just saw it. It's right here by Sophie Schwindling. Wow,
that's an
this
impressive
girl exists for
deadpan.
real, and she's truly an alt-writer.
Actually, now I don't know whether or not you're doing deadpan or if you really. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's also, like Ashley Madison, the cheating website, like is actually, it's a dude who runs it, and they just gave it a female name because they thought it would attract more people.
So it's still possible that she's just a model and that this is not the real person writing the article.
We could be catfish clickbaited.
So hard. We need to contact her. We need to contact Sophie.
I just Googled. I don't see anything, but yeah. All right, well, this was a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, let's read some of the last super chats before we conclude. DP says, Red Elephants runs Film Your Marxist Professors. I didn't know that.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah.
He's got a Facebook channel. I really encourage people to check it out. It's great stuff.
John J says, nice guys, National Socialism, the aesthetic we need. Pam Frou says, if ethnostates attract the most tribal of our people, would they not alter our genetic predispositions within a few generations and thus change the very thing we are trying to preserve? On that, I will say it wouldn't be dramatic if people of a nation, if the white people of this nation were to segregate and eventually only 5% of that nation would actually join the ethnostate. personally, I'm not alarmed because self-adherence to that cause is a good measure for the kind of people I would want to live with. And so, yes, you would lose part of the variability. Maybe you would lose the SJWs. Maybe you would lose some leftists who wouldn't want that new society. But what's to lose? You're going to lose a part of the genetic variability that was undermining your people anyway. So let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of it in the sense of leaving them behind, do whatever they want with their section of the country. Fernando Covet says, first, they take away the guns and welfare second. And Vlad Romaniuk says, women always had a place in politics, just not in the positions that males have been holding historically. It's related to their reproduction strategy. All right, Frame Games, it was really awesome. I was extremely tired, but I tried to keep up the energy as much as I could, and it was a fascinating conversation. I think you got even more material about strategies that we could cover in a future episode.
Yep, definitely. All right, well, I guess we'll talk next week, and great as always, JF. Thanks, and thank you, chat.
Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.